Hi team. Hey, I've been told by other EV enthusiasts that the BMW i3s don't have the capability of the newer generation EVs like Teslas with capabilities like dog mode or camping mode. So I decided I'd see if this is really the case and do some tests. One thing we have to do, we know we don't have a display that can do dog mode, so we have to make our own signs. But if we do that, can we actually do some tests? So here's what I came up with. One of the simplest things you can do for dog mode is when you turn the car off, you can go to the goodbye screen, which usually shows up when you turn the car off, and then just click on activate climate control, which will run the climate system for 20 to 30 minutes after you leave the car. So that is one way to at least get a short-term dog mode started. The other way to get dog mode started is go into settings, then go to climate, and then under climate, click on activate comfort climate. And you can see that it immediately will turn on and start running that way. So that's the second way to start dog mode. Again, it should run between 20 to 30 minutes while you step out of the car, and should be no problem. Even if I open the door, it is still activated, so you can't exit the car. The third way to do the dog mode is go into settings, go to departure time, then precondition for departure. You want to turn that on. We'll do that in a minute. But you have 3 separate departure times that you can activate. So if you set them back to back, for example, 9 o'clock, maybe 9:45, third one could be like 10:30, you can basically do your climate control and extend that out for an extended period of time. The climate will turn on, depending on the temperature, anywhere from 30 minutes to about 10 minutes before the departure time, and will stay on for another roughly about 15 minutes past the departure time if you do not depart. So based on that, you can then have staggered departure times on the same day set up. So when you leave the car, it'll turn on for roughly 20, 30 minutes. You can then have a idle period, maybe another 20, 30 minutes. Turn it back on for 20 or 30 minutes again with the second departure time. Turn it off for 20 or 30 minutes. Turn it back on, third departure time. There is only 3 departure times that are settable, so you are limited by that. If you're doing camping mode, basically you would do the same thing, but leave it on for a bigger gap between the departure times that you set. So with the initial goodbye screen, exiting, turning on climate control, then having departure time set, you can really have 4 continuous climate control settings turned on back to back that emulate or simulate a dog mode or a camping mode. I want to So dog mode started about 30 minutes before the departure time set. So looks like as long as you set the departure time 30 minutes beyond when your starting point is, you should be okay for the first departure time set point. From the sound, it looks like the heater turned on about 10 minutes prior to the departure time finishing. So it looks like about 15 minutes after the end of the preconditioning, it did turn off. But the second preconditioning is kicking in soon, and we'll see what happens. So here's the data we collected from the little test. it looks like every time you do a preconditioning with this temperature difference, the ambient was again about 55 degrees, and the preconditioning was set at around 68. Dropped the battery level by about 10%. So it's pretty significant impact by running the preconditioning. The cabin temperature versus time, or how fast does it cool down if we just leave the car idle, was relatively slow. I was somewhat surprised. So we're looking at about 0.06 degrees per minute. So it's fairly slow with this kind of a temperature differential, which is actually quite good news. So I thought I'd try to explain how dog mode would work in the i3. So I do this quick graph and I'll explain it real quickly. So here is the starting condition. Then at plus 60 minutes, we set the first departure time, plus 120 the second departure time, plus 180 the third departure time. Again, it takes only maybe 30 seconds or so to set this up once you park the car, so it's not a big commitment on time to get this to work. So what would happen, the heating system, you would start with turning on the precondition on exit, as I had shown in the video earlier, and you would go from an idle, this is the heater, would go from an idle to an active state. Then after roughly 30 minutes, it's going to shut off, and then about 15 minutes after that, the first departure preparation will start early by about 15 minutes roughly, and then this will then reheat the car. Then it will go into an idle state for roughly 30 minutes before the second departure time kicks in and starts preconditioning the car again. Then it will kick off for about 30 minutes, and the third one kicks back in again. So based on the studies of how fast the heat is leaving the car, I only had the one test condition of about 55 degrees ambient external. So I'll quickly draw what's going to happen. You're going to go from your initial state of the car, and it will continue to heat up until it gets up to the 68 degrees. Then when it goes idle for 15 minutes, based on the data we collected on the graph, it's only going to cool down about a degree during that time period. Then it will go back to holding to the nominal temperature again, which is, typically defaults to about 68. And then within 30 minutes, it's going to cool down a little bit less than 2 degrees. And then it'll heat back up again to the nominal temperature, cool back off again, 2 degrees, heat back up, and then finally cool back down roughly about 2 more degrees. So you're holding a fairly stable temperature in the car, at least with these types of temperature differences. Again, 55 external, heating the car to 68. So pretty straightforward, should work based on the tests so far. Again, different temperature conditions, this cycling could potentially change. But that would give you, again, almost 4 hours of controlled temperature within the car. So for camping mode, works pretty much the same way, except in this case, we're trying to get a scale out to 8 hours. Let's say you were sleeping in your car and you wanted to be able to maintain the temperature in the car during that period of time. So we're going to assume the car starts already pre-warmed, and then every 2 hours, we set one of the departure times. So the first one at 2 hours, the next one at plus 4 hours, the next one at plus 6 hours. So based on, again, the temperature differences between 55 ambient and heating the car up to 68 degrees. Of course, if you can change this one down more, or if this one's lower, if that delta is the same, then the heat gain and loss should be roughly the same as well. So we're going to see initially the temperature is going to drop off. It's going to drop off down to, I think we said roughly about, what was it? About 4 or 5 degrees. I'll double check that. Would heat back up, drop down 4 to 5 degrees, heat back up, drop down 4 or 5 degrees, heat back up, drop down 4 or 5 degrees again, maybe a little bit more. Before the end of the cycle, he'd wake up, and then you can decide what to do at that point. So that should be well within, if you're within under a blanket or in a sleeping bag inside of the car, that's not a very big temperature swing to have to deal with. So I think it's doable based on what we talked about. Again, the big problem would be you're looking at a 10% hit in the battery life at each cycle. So you really would not want to do this unless you were fairly well charged in a fairly high charge state to minimize the range loss by going into camping mode or dog mode.